Imagine waking up on a floor made of cold stone. Your skin is itching, your bones are snapping, and your voice, the voice you once used to boast of your conquests, is dissolving into a desperate, guttural squeal. You look up and see a woman standing over you with a golden cup, her eyes colder than the depths of the Aegean. Most people tell you Circe was a monster who hated men, but the truth is that she didn't turn those sailors into beasts. She simply stripped away the human mask to reveal the predator that was already there. But how a goddess of light became the queen of monsters is a story that begins with a betrayal so deep it changed the fabric of magic forever. To understand the Witch of Aeaea, you have to understand the House of the Sun. In the age before the Olympians truly reigned, the world belonged to the Titans, and among them, none were more terrifying than Helios. He was not a man, he was a force of nature. Every morning he drove a 4-horse chariot across the sky, his crown radiating a heat so intense it could char the earth. He lived in a palace of gold and ivory, where the very air was saturated with his brilliance. There were no shadows in the house of Helios. There was nowhere to hide from his gaze. Into this world of blinding perfection, Circe was born. She was the daughter of the sun and the Oceanid nymph Perse. By all accounts, she should have been a masterpiece. Her siblings certainly were. Her brother, Aeaeus, was a king of iron and blood who would one day hold the golden fleece. Her sister, Pasiphae, was a queen of silver and moonlight. They were radiant, they were loud, they were divine. But Circe was an error. She didn't have the golden eyes of her father that could see through mountains. Her eyes were yellow like a hawk's. Sharp, yes, but earthly. She didn't have the regal, terrifying grace of her mother, and most damning of all, she had the voice of a mortal. In the language of the gods, voices are like harps or thunderclaps. But when Circe spoke, it was the sound of a human girl, thin, reedy, and full of the cracks and tremors of emotion. To the Titans, she was a broken chime in a symphony of bells. She grew up in the corners of the palace. Have you ever felt like a ghost in your own home? Imagine spending 1,000 years as the person no one bothers to introduce. Her father didn't look at her because she didn't shine. Her mother didn't love her because she wasn't a prize to be traded. She was the invisible daughter. But being invisible has a secret power: observation. While the gods were busy with their petty wars and their endless reflections, Circe was watching. She watched how the light hit the tide pools. She watched how the flowers in the garden didn't just grow, they fought. She realized that the world wasn't just made of divine decree, it was made of stuff: roots, soil, blood, venom. She spent her childhood gathering. She would follow the servants to the edges of the world where the wild things lived. She realized that while she had no power in her blood, she could find power in the earth. This was the birth of Pharmakeia. This wasn't the Shazam magic of a lightning bolt. This was the magic of the mortar and pestle. It was the magic of the slow simmer. It was the first time a being used the natural world to hack the divine system. She began to experiment. She would mix the juice of a crushed poppy with the dew from a grave. She would talk to the plants not as a master, but as a student, and the plants started to talk back. They told her how to make a man sleep. They told her how to make a woman weep. She was building a weapon. She didn't know it yet, but she was preparing for the moment the world would finally break her. She wasn't looking for a war, she was looking for a connection. She wanted someone just one person to look at her and see more than a reedy voice and yellow eyes. She wanted a reason to believe that being human wasn't a curse. She was about to find that reason in a mortal fisherman named Glaucus. But as we're about to see, in Greek mythology, the things you love are usually the tools the fates use to destroy you. Stay with me, because the invisible daughter is about to commit a crime so horrific the gods will have no choice to notice her. To understand the monster, you must first understand the nursery. Circe was born in the halls of Aeaea, the golden palace of the sun. Imagine a world where there is no shadow, no cool corners, no reprieve. Her father, Helios, did not walk, he burned. He was the source of all sight, yet he was blind to anything that did not reflect his own glory. In this house of titanium light, Circe was an anomaly, a blemish on a perfect lens. Most gods are born with their power already screaming in their veins. Her brother, Aeaea, could command the winds of the east. Her sister, Pasiphae, held the lunar tides in the palm of her hand. But Circe was thin. Her skin didn't glow with the golden ichor of the Titans. It was pale, translucent, etched with the veins of a mortal. But it was her voice that truly unnerved them. The gods speak in thunder and music. Circe spoke in the brotos, the human tongue. It was a thin, reedy sound that grated against the ears of the divine. To her father, she was a broken instrument. To her mother, she was a reminder of the muddy, fragile world of men that they were supposed to be above. Have you ever been the disappointing child? The one who sits at the dinner table while the conversation flows over and around you as if you were made of glass? That was Circe's eternity. She spent centuries as a ghost in her own home, but ghosts see things the living miss. While her siblings preened, Circe looked down. She began to notice the things that grew in the shadows where the sun couldn't reach. She noticed that certain flowers, the heavy-headed poppies, the toxic nightshade, didn't need her father's permission to kill. She noticed that the earth had a pulse, a dark, slow rhythm that was older even than the Titans. She began to collect. She would steal away to the damp meadows of Oceanus. There she discovered Pharmakeia, not the snap of a finger magic of Zeus, but the magic of the process. It was the magic of the hands, the magic of the soil. She realized that if she couldn't be a sun, she would become a poison. Then came Glaucus, a fisherman, a mortal with salt in his beard and a soul that seemed to Circe like the only real thing in a world of golden masks. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. Glaucus looked at her, and he didn't see a disappointment. He saw a goddess. But Circe knew the truth. She was immortal, and he was a flickering candle. He would wither and turn to dust, while she remained forever trapped in her father's blinding light. She decided to play God. She took the herbs she had gathered, the moly and the Promethean roots, and she brewed a draught of divinity. She gave it to him. She watched him scream as his legs fused into a massive, shimmering fishtail, as his skin turned the color of the deep Atlantic, and his hair became a tangled forest of emerald kelp. She had done it. She had created a god. But here is the tragedy of the unloved. They think that by giving someone everything, they ensure that person will stay. The moment Glaucus became divine, he inherited the divine ego. He didn't look at Circe with gratitude, he looked at her as a stepping stone. He looked past her, and he saw Scylla. Scylla was everything Circe wasn't. She was a nymph of pure, effortless beauty. She didn't have to work for her power. She simply was. Glaucus, the man Circe had literally made, abandoned her in the dirt of the shore to chase a girl who hadn't given him a second thought. Imagine the coldness that settled in Circe's chest, the years of being ignored by her father, bullied by her sister, and finally discarded by the one creature she dared to love. The human voice she possessed didn't cry out for mercy. It whispered a curse. She didn't go after Glaucus. She went after the thing he loved. She found the pool where Scylla bathed, a crystal-clear spring that tasted of salt and innocence. Circe stood over it, and for the first time, she let the poison out. She didn't just want Scylla dead. She wanted Scylla to feel as hideous as Circe felt inside. As the dark brew touched the water, the spring turned the color of bruised plums. When Scylla stepped, the screaming began. It wasn't the scream of a woman. It was the sound of 12 dogs howling in one throat. Circe watched from the rocks. She watched the legs melt. She watched the heads sprout. She watched the beauty of the world get eaten by the monster she had crafted. And in that moment, the sun's disappointment was gone. In her place stood the Witch of the West. She had finally made the gods notice her, but as she would soon learn, being noticed by the gods is the most dangerous thing that can happen to a woman. Would you have stayed quiet, or would you have burned the world down just to prove you could? Stay with me, because the Council of Olympus was about to hand down a sentence that would change human history forever.
The gods do not like to be reminded of their own cruelty. When Circe stood before her father, Helios, with the blood of Scylla's innocence on her hands, she expected execution. She expected her father to burn her into ash. But Helios did something far worse. He looked at her and felt nothing. "You are a smudge upon the sun," he told her, "a shadow that refuses to dissipate." The Council of Olympus didn't just exile her, they erased her. They bound her wrists in chains of adamant, the metal that can hold a god, and they didn't lead her to the door. They threw her. Imagine the invisible daughter falling through the layers of the atmosphere. She saw the palaces of the gods shrink into tiny sparks of light. She saw the curve of the world, the vastness of the ocean, and the cold, indifferent stars. She wasn't a goddess anymore. She was a falling star with a broken heart. She hit the island of Aeaea not as a queen, but as wreckage. The island, Aeaea, was a place the gods had forgotten. It was a dense, suffocating jungle of cedar and oak, surrounded by a mist that ate the memory of any sailor who wandered too close. Circe crawled from the crater of her own impact, her golden ichor mixing with the black mud of the island. She was alone. Truly alone. No father to ignore her, no sister to mock her, just the silence of the trees. But she wasn't the only thing on the island. The first month was a war for survival. The first man of Aeaea wasn't a guest, he was a nightmare. His name has been lost to time, but the sailors called him the Boar King. He was a man who had been shipwrecked decades before, a brute who had regressed into something savage. He didn't see a goddess when he found Circe bleeding in the woods. He saw a meal. He saw a thing to be broken. He hunted her through the cedar groves for 3 days. Circe, the girl who had never known hunger or cold, had to learn the language of the island or die. On the 4th night, he cornered her in a sea cave. He moved toward her, a jagged bone knife in his hand, his eyes red with madness. A sharp, crystalline ding, the sound of magic sparking for the first time on the island. Circe didn't use a wand. She didn't have one yet. She reached into the mud at her feet, grabbed a handful of the moly root she had brought with her in the fall, and she screamed. Not a human scream, a command. She didn't just poison him. She reached into the fabric of his soul and twisted. She felt his greed, his violence, and his filth. She forced it to the surface. The Boar King didn't just die, he collapsed. His bones began to reshape themselves to fit his spirit. He shrieked as his skin became hide, as his face elongated into a snout and his hands became hooves. Circe stood over him, breathing hard, her hands covered in his blood and her own magic. She looked at the beast she had made, the first resident of Aeaea. In that moment, she realized the truth. The island wasn't her prison, it was her laboratory. The gods hadn't banished her, they had given her a kingdom where she could finally be the architect of her own justice. She didn't cry for her father anymore. She began to build. She used her magic to raise the stones of her palace. She whispered to the lions and the wolves of the island, and for the first time in their lives, the predators bowed. She was no longer the sun's disappointment. She was the mistress of Aeaea, and she was ready for the next ship to arrive, because now she knew exactly what men were made of, and she knew exactly what she was going to turn them into.
Aeaea was not a prison, not for Circe. For the first time in an eternity, the sun's disappointment was the sun of her own world. Imagine a silence so thick you can hear the sap running through the cedar trees. For centuries, Circe honed her craft. She didn't just brew potions, she breathed them. She learned that every leaf, every root, and every drop of honey had a spirit that could be bargained with. She became a scientist of the soul. But then, the world of men found her. In the Bronze Age, a woman alone was seen as a resource, a prize, a thing to be used. The sailors who washed up on Aeaea weren't explorers, they were predators. They came with swords drawn and hearts full of a specific kind of darkness, the kind that believes no is just a suggestion. Stay with me here, because this is where the villain is born, or perhaps it's where she's finally revealed. Inside the silent palace, Circe would invite them in. She would offer them high-backed chairs of polished silver. She would set the table with Pramnian wine and barley meal mixed with golden honey. She gave them Xenia, the sacred law of the guest. But as they ate, their true natures would emerge. They would grow loud, they would grow handsy, they would look at Circe, this quiet woman with the yellow eyes, and they would plan how to divide her belongings and her body. Circe would watch them. She would wait until the wine hit their blood, and then she would pick up her wand of mountain ash. "You want to be beasts," she would whisper in that human-sounding voice, "then let the outside match the inside." The transformation was never instant. That would be too merciful. In your mind's eye, I want you to see what happened to the first crew. First, the posture breaks. Their spines crack and elongate, forcing these proud warriors down onto all fours. Their hands, the hands that held swords and oars, melt. The fingers fuse, the nails thicken and harden into black, split hooves. Then comes the skin. The bronze tan of the sailor is replaced by a coarse, bristly pink or a muddy gray. It itches, it burns. They try to scream for help, to beg their captains, but their tongues have thickened. Their teeth are flattening into grinders for acorns and filth. The most horrific part, their minds remained human. Imagine being trapped in a body that only wants to root in the dirt. You remember your wife, you remember your ship, you remember your name, but when you try to say it, all that comes out is a wet, guttural grunt. You look at your comrade, and you don't see a hero, you see a hog. Circe didn't hate them. Hate requires effort. She simply had a profound sense of order. She would drive them out of the palace with a whip of willow. She would lead them to the styes, throwing down acorns and mast fruit, and she would watch them scramble for it, trampling each other in the mud. Why pigs, you might ask? Why not lions? Why not wolves? Because a lion is noble, a wolf is a hunter, but a pig is pure appetite. It is a creature that consumes everything and gives nothing back. It is the perfect reflection of a man who takes what he has not earned. She wasn't being cruel, she was being an artist. She was clearing her island of the human pests and replacing them with a more honest form of life. For years, the Witch of Aeaea became a ghost story whispered in the ports of the Mediterranean. Sailors would pull their cloaks tighter and say, "Don't land on the island of the rising smoke. The lady there has a brew that turns men into swine." But here is the curiosity gap that kept Circe weaving. She wasn't waiting for a hero to stop her. She was waiting for a man who was actually a man. She was waiting for someone whose soul was stronger than his stomach, someone whose humanity wasn't just a mask, but a fortress. When Odysseus's ship appeared on the horizon, Circe didn't feel fear. She felt hunger. She sharpened her wand. She brewed her strongest wine. She prepared the silver chairs. She thought she was about to add 20 more hogs to her pen. She didn't know that the King of Wiles was coming, and that he was carrying a gift from the gods that would turn her island of justice into a battlefield of the heart. Would you have been able to resist her? Or are you, like most of us, just a few sips of wine away from the sty? Stay with me, because when the wand finally touched the shoulder of Odysseus, the sound that followed wasn't a grunt. It was the sound of a god falling in love.
For 1,000 years, the game had been the same. The ship arrives, the men hunger, the witch feeds, the pigs grunt. But when the man of many ways stepped onto the threshold of Circe's stone hall, the air itself seemed to go thin. Odysseus did not come with the bluster of a conqueror. He came with the silence of a man who had already looked into the eyes of death and found them wanting. Circe watched him from her throne. She saw the grime of the sea, the gray in his beard, and the way his hand hovered, not over his sword, but over his heart.
She offered him the chair of silver. She offered him the wine of Promne, laced with the honey of the hills and the darkness of her soul. "Drink," she whispered, and he did. He drained the cup until the golden dregs were gone. Circe felt the familiar surge of power. She raised her wand of mountain ash. She reached out to touch his shoulder, to feel the muscle dissolve and the bones snap, to hear the final human gasp before the grunt took over. "To the sty with you," she commanded. "Go and lie with your fellows." But Odysseus did not fall. He did not change. He stood. He grew taller, his eyes burning with a light that didn't come from the sun. He didn't look like a pig. He looked like a storm in a human skin. In a flash of bronze, his sword was out. The edge was at her throat before she could draw a breath. For the first time since her exile began, Circe felt something she had almost forgotten: fear. But underneath the fear was a sudden, violent spark of interest. The magic had failed. The god hacker had been hacked. "Who are you?" she breathed. "What mortal can drink my poison and still stand?" Odysseus didn't answer with words. He answered with the moly, the weight-flowered, black-rooted herb that Hermes had given him. He showed her that he hadn't won through strength, but through intelligence. He had used her own weapon, Pharmakeia, against her. This was the intellectual peak of their tragedy. They were the only two beings in the world who understood that power wasn't a gift from the gods, it was something you took. The music shifts to a haunting, ethereal harp melody. Odysseus forced her to swear a great oath by the Styx that she would work no more mischief against him. And Circe, looking at this man who had outplayed her, found that she didn't want to kill him anymore. She wanted to know him. She turned his men back. One by one, the swine became humans again, but they weren't the same. They were younger, taller, more beautiful. Circe's magic, when used with love rather than spite, didn't just restore, it perfected. But stay with me, this is where the retention of the heart begins. They spent a year together. For 365 days, the loom sat idle. Odysseus didn't spend his time looting her treasures. He spent it listening to her voice. He was the only man in history who wanted the witch's mind more than her body. They walked the beaches of Aeaea. She told him the secrets of the stars and the hidden paths of the sea. She told him of the sirens who sing the truth of the world and the Scylla she had created in a fit of pique. She confessed her sins to a man who lived a life of lies. But as the months bled into one another, the man of many ways began to look toward the horizon. Have you ever loved someone you knew you couldn't keep? Someone whose destiny was a map that didn't include your island? Circe could have turned him into a lion to keep him by her side forever. She could have clouded his mind so he forgot the name of Penelope and the hills of Ithaca. She had the power to make him her eternal puppet. But she didn't. In the final weeks, she became his architect. She was the one who told him he must go to the land of the dead to speak with the ghost of Tiresias. She was the one who gave him the black E and the ram to sacrifice to the shadows. She prepared the very sails that would carry him away from her. "You are a king," she told him as they stood on the sand, "and a king without a kingdom is just a man in a boat. Go." She watched the ship shrink into a speck of white on the blue. She didn't weep like a mortal woman. She didn't rage like a goddess. She simply walked back to her hall, sat at her loom, and picked up the shuttle. The tragedy of Circe is that she was too brilliant to be a god's daughter and too powerful to be a man's wife. She was destined to be the one who prepares the hero for his journey, but never the one who gets to finish it with him. But don't think for a second that she went back to being the sun's disappointment. Odysseus left her with something more dangerous than magic. He left her with a son and a secret that would eventually bring the house of Ithaca to its knees. Are you ready for the ending they didn't teach you in school? The part where the circle of magic finally breaks the circle of life. Because Act 5 is where the tragic villain earns her crown.
They say a circle is the perfect shape. It has no beginning and it has no end. It is a loop of inevitability. And for Circe, the circle was about to close in the most horrific way possible. Odysseus was gone. His white sails had vanished over the horizon of the Ionian Sea, leaving Circe once again to the company of her lions and her loom. But she did not return to the silence alone. Inside her, a new life was weaving itself, a son named Telegonus. Imagine growing up on an island where your only friends are transformed beasts and your mother is a woman who can turn the stars to blood. Telegonus was a prince of shadows. He was raised on stories of a father who was a king, a hero, a man of many ways. But as the boy grew, the stories became a hunger. When Telegonus reached manhood, Circe gave him a gift. Not a crown, not a shield. She gave him a spear. But this was no ordinary weapon of bronze. The point was tipped with the jagged, venomous spine of a stingray. It was a weapon of Pharmakeia, a weapon that carried the cold, paralyzing death of the deep sea. "Go," she told him, "find the man who left us." The prophecy of the dead came true in the mud of an Aeaean beach. Odysseus, now an old man, heard of a raider attacking his shores. He didn't know it was his own flesh and blood. He didn't know that the boy with the strange spear was the legacy of the year he spent in the arms of a witch. They fought in the surf, the king of wiles versus the son of sorcery. The stingray spine pierced Odysseus's chest. The venom, crafted by Circe's own knowledge, flooded his heart. As the great hero of Troy lay dying in the salt water, he looked up at the young man and realized too late that the sea had finally come for him, just as the prophecy said. But the tragedy doesn't end with a funeral, it ends with a circle. In a twist that would make the gods shudder, Telegonus brought his father's body back to Aeaea. And he didn't come alone. He brought Penelope, the widow, and Telemachus, the firstborn son. Think about the tension in that room. The witch, the wife, and the sons of the same dead man all gathered on the island of pigs. Circe looked at them, these broken remnants of the hero she had loved, and she did the only thing a goddess of magic can do. She granted them the one thing that is a blessing to mortals, but a curse to the divine: immortality. She married Telemachus. Telegonus married Penelope. They became a closed loop of eternal grief and eternal power. They would live forever on that island, weaving the same memories over and over until the stars burned out. As we close this documentary, I want you to look at the villain once last time. Was she the monster who turned men to swine, or was she the only one who saw the truth? Circe didn't create the tragedy, she just provided the thread. She is the tragic villain because she is the mirror of our own evolution. We start as beasts of appetite, we strive to be heroes of cunning, and we end as ghosts of memory. Circe is still there. Somewhere in the mist of the Mediterranean, the sun's disappointment is still weaving, and she is still waiting for a guest who is brave enough to drink her wine and honest enough to stay a man. So tell me, in the comments below, if you were given the chance to live forever on Circe's island, but you had to live with the ghosts of everyone you've ever hurt, would you take the cup?